And his mess. Let's go.
You going?
Yeah.
Hey, this is Chris from Revenge Performance again. Today we're going to get a little bit of revenge on our short block here. Back in about 2013, we had this exact short block, but we had stock pistons and rods and all that stuff. And we had DR750s, and so we were pushing it up, probably making 550 horsepower or so. And after a lot of pulls, eventually we developed a rod knock. Turned out the number 4 rod bearing was spun and really needed rebuilt. So there was no question where to send the engine to. We sent it to Ray Pampena and Scott Merkle Racing Engines in Long Island, New York. And they built this 3.5 liter 6G72 7.4 crank stroker engine. It's just been great. We've just had Ross pistons, you know, the thick wall trench pins, and just BC rods. Just pretty basic stuff in here, honestly. But it's been great for school. We've probably put 700 through this, and we probably could do some more. We just recently went through the bottom end and just did bearings and things, but these are the original rings from 2013. Cylinders still look good. There's probably 20,000 miles on it, and a lot of them are a quarter mile at a time, and probably most of them are over 600 horsepower. This engine never even used oil. We drove drag week, race week last year, 1,300 miles. It did not use an ounce of oil, never smoked. It's just been a great engine. We're actually going to put this engine in the little black 3000 GT we may have hinted about on our Instagram and our other social media feeds, and we're going to try to just keep this as like a low budget, but since we have this short block engine for Brent's car. So we've been really wanting to run a lot faster with the white stealth, and you know, a lot of that is making more power. And we want to be very reliable while we're making this power. I don't want to run on the dyno, you know, put down 800,000-900,000 horsepower and then have to change bearings out every few months, that sort of thing, or every week, you know, whatever it would take. This has the Mitsubishi 6G74 crankshaft. Ray and his team at Merkle Racing Engines, they cut it down to fit the 7.2 block, and so you get almost a half-inch more stroke, but it basically is a stock crank. And so it is a forging, so it's not by any means weak. But when you start getting over 600, 700, 800, it makes me a little bit nervous. Ray personally made about 1,100 on this same engine, but he had all of our rods and a few other things like that. But to me, that's, you know, you're gonna crack the crank, basically. The stock forged crank, after years and years of abuse, they start to crack. Ray has actually told me that he can hear it. And so he has a DR750 car that makes like 700 wheel that he just beats on 1 through 5th gear type of pulls. And he says he can hear it when the crank gets cracked enough that he needs to replace it, and he'll take the crank out and the bearings will still be fine, but the crank, he magnaflux it and it's got cracks in it. So we don't want to risk that, particularly if you're going to be doing drag and drive events or you're out for a week. You know, you don't want to risk crankshaft failure. It's not like we can swap a crank alongside the road in one of these. You know, unless we start carrying spares and crazy things like that, it's really a catastrophic failure to an engine to break the crankshaft. So this engine will live on. I'm still love this engine. This VIN number on this engine matches the car, and so I'm always going to keep this block in case by some miracle we want to put this thing back to, you know, a little bit more collector's type of situation. Probably not going to happen, but I at least want to have the block because it does have VIN number stamped on this pad on the corner, and it does match the car exactly. So this is the original 4-bolt block that came in 1985 in this stealth, and I want to keep it. But we wanted a spare engine, basically. So once again, we talked to Ray. We talked to our good friend James Merriman. He had a spare 4-bolt block, and between the two of them, we also got a Billet Bc Crank. So this is also going to be a stroker. The Billet Bc Cranks have just slightly less stroke than the 7.4. I believe it's like 1.8 millimeter less or 2 millimeter less. So the displacement is going to be pretty even. We had 92 millimeter pistons in this one, 92 millimeter pistons in this one, both Ross. The reason we do that is because, you know, the more you bore these out, the less head gasket sealing surface you have. And if you go large enough, the OEM head gasket doesn't work very well because it actually overhangs the bore, which you can do if you chamfer your pistons, but it's really not the best solution. So both of these, basically the same displacement. The difference with this one is the billet crank, and we went with the billet Oliver I-beam rods. We had the BC H-beams in this engine, and they don't have an ultimate failure at this power level, and they probably wouldn't at 1,000, honestly. The issue is the wrist pin bushings on the BC rod is really narrow. So like where the pin goes through the piston, this part here is very narrow, so you got a lot of pin hanging out, and so that can cause your wrist pin to flex, and it'll actually tear the bushing up in the rod, and so you'll get wrist pin noise, and if you don't address that, eventually you're going to have some type of catastrophic failure. So good things about the Oliver rods, they're going to be a little heavier. It's an I-beam design, usually a little heavier than H, so the ultimate strength is a little bit more, but the most important thing is Ray has worked with Oliver to design a rod that has an extremely wide pin support bushing, and basically there's almost no gap, and so you're going to have 2-3 times as much capability on your wrist pins. You're not going to have a problem with that. So that's always been my fear with this engine. Basically wrist pins, crankshaft crack potential. This crank was magnafluxed just recently. We had it polished and it was not cracked yet. So I guess we don't drive as hard as Ray does. We're just not as talented at cracking things. But I'm just saying this is not a weak solution at all. If you're going to make 600-700 all day, no problem at all. But when you want to make 1,000, particularly to the ground through an automatic, that's why we went with so much bigger turbos that we did on this setup. That's why we went with ported heads and bigger valves. That's why I've gone to the billet crank and the I-beams from Oliver. I think I've rambled on way too long probably. Well, let's go ahead and get this box open. It looks like Merkle's crating game is really up there. Got the business card on here in case you have any problems. And we have this very secure crate that your engine's not going to get wet or damaged, things like that. I've been wanting to do something like this for our transmissions as well. We're actually talking to some companies that make crates just because the freight companies have to move so many items, things can happen. We want to make them as safe as possible moving, because a lot of people have a lot of money in their transmissions and engines, and you want to take good care of them. We don't want to build one and then they get damaged on the way and we have to take it back, fix it for the client. I mean, it's obviously something we do, but I don't want a client to have to wait for that sort of thing, or any kind of stuff that can happen with that. So we got this crate. Let's see. You're seeing this in real time. I haven't opened this. We just picked it up yesterday, so let's see if I can find the screws for it. Put that on. I think my battery's about dead in this one too, Hunter.
Unfortunate.
It's the third battery today that we found dead. So the plan is we're going to swap the heads from the old motor onto this one, and we will be putting probably some stock heads on this, our older short block. Then part of the deal is I've told Brent, hey, if we blow this thing up, tune in or something, we need it for race week, that short block's coming back out of his car. And he can never sell it, of course, because like I said, the VIN number matches the white stuff, and I don't want to lose that. But until he got that car, this was just going to be a spare wrapped up in the corner, but unfortunately it's not going to be quite that easy. Hopefully we never need it with this foundation here. Here we go. Look at that.
Ta-da.
Beautiful. Well, I just so happen to have a knife that truly is just plain luck. Not usually that prepared.
Incredible.
Incredible. Ah, it smells like an engine. Let you guys have a good look at it. Well, oh yeah.
There it is.
You can see it. Here is our 7.2 4-bolt block. It has Ross pistons. One thing interesting you can see different here is you'll notice this bulge here is actually a little bit less on the new engine, and the reason for that is because the stroke is slightly more on that, so you didn't have to do that as much with the compression height on this piston, and also still be able to maintain compression. So they have fully balanced this. You know, it's been decked. We are running ARP main studs in this as well. Trend 220 wall wrist pins, the Ross Pistons, and basically we bored out as little as possible, just again so we have the best possible head gasket sealing. So you'll see this on the stand. Don't worry, we'll get this out of the crate here a little bit later, and you'll see the bottom end where you get to see our Billet Crankshaft and the other goodies in this thing. But I'm really excited. It's kind of like, I'm sure for a lot of you guys, you know, having one of these at all, Stealth or 3000 GT or whatever sports car you like or truck is awesome, and it's just a major kind of dream to have. But I've always dreamed of having a Billet short block, and I'm just really glad that Ray and Merkle Race Engines was able to help us out. Those guys have just always been great. There's not really anybody else in the country that I would have build my engine, and we don't even try to build engines here because I know we just can't do it to this level, and we're going to stick to transmissions. And so if you need an engine to get some more revenge on your ride than your current one has, talk to Ray Pampena and Merkle Race Engines.